Welcome to the SACNAS Native Initiatives webinar series. Today's webinar features a panel discussion from the author and co-authors of the article, Developing a Family Engagement Plan for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander STEM Students in Higher Education. My name is Dr. Darryl Monto, and I am the SACNAS Native Initiatives Manager. We are so glad you joined us today. This month, we have two webinars that are focused on engaging and mentoring STEM students. Today's webinar will focus on the engagement, and next week's webinar with Dr. Sweeney Winchief will focus on mentoring. That webinar will be held on Monday, June 14th at 3 p.m. Central Time, 1 p.m. Pacific Time. We hope you're signed up for that one and will be able to join us for that one as well. Let's see, I need to share my screen here. I've got a little PowerPoint set up for us. And all right, that's me. So I want to take a brief moment to welcome our first-time attendees to SACNAS. We are a fully inclusive organization dedicated to achieving true diversity in STEM, where the field, including leadership positions, reflects the demographics of the population. As the nation's largest multicultural and multidisciplinary STEM diversity organization in the country, SACNAS creates space for all members, volunteers, and partners feel they belong and can embrace their intersectional identities. If you are not yet, we invite you to become a SACNAS member. Membership gives you access to a welcoming community of like-minded scientists and students and professionals from all STEM disciplines, including the opportunity to connect with one of our 118 chapters across the country. Eligibility to apply for programs specifically for each stage of your education or career, exclusive opportunities like jobs, internships, and more from our partners, and an opportunity to raise your voice for true diversity and inclusion in STEM. You can sign up for free by visiting sacnas.org/memberships. We have a few housekeeping rules to review. If you have any questions throughout the panel portion of this webinar, we ask that you please hold on to those until we get closer to the end, and you will be able to submit your questions through the chat feature. We will answer as many questions as we can. Please remember to always be polite and respectful to others with your comments. If you have any additional questions that we don't get to, please stay to the end of the webinar to see how you can continue the conversation in the SACNAS online community. All right. So let's get started. Today, we are joined by three panelists who are part of the team responsible for developing and publishing the article, Developing an Engagement Plan for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander STEM Students in Higher Education. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jonathan Baker, Assistant Professor, Dr. Jolene Cogwell, Assistant Professor, and Kaho'ali Wood, Cultural Engagement Specialist, all from Chaminade University in Honolulu. I'm going to turn it over to the panel so that they will share more information about themselves, and we'll begin the presentation.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for inviting us to participate in this webinar series. We're very happy to be here. We're going to start with some brief introductions, and then we're going to take turns discussing aspects of the article and our approach to family engagement at Chaminade. And then hopefully there'll be plenty of time for discussion and answering questions at the end. I'm not going to cover everything in the article. That's probably for the best for everybody. But if there are pieces that I skip over that you want to talk about in more detail, we're happy to discuss anything that's in there as well as anything else we present today. So I'll start with introductions. I'm Jonathan Baker. I'm originally from Minnesota. I came out here to do my PhD work. I've been in Hawaii now for almost 21 years. I'm a medical anthropologist by training, and I've been at Chaminade since 2017 working with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Inclusive Excellence program. So my interests are medical anthropology, culture and health, as well as work on inclusion in STEM. And so I'll pass it on to Dr. Cogwell.
Aloha, everybody. My name is Jolene Noelani Tarne Cogwell. I have been at Chaminade for going on 13 years now. I did my PhD at the University of Hawaii in cell molecular biology. and I am in the Natural Science and Mathematics department and work with Jonathan and Kohali on our Native Hawaiian Ho'olu Scholars Program, which we'll be talking a little bit about. And I think that's all I really have to say about me. I'm really happy to be here.
Okay, I think that's my cue. Alo mai kako, mai kahipai, maluna alalo mai kaupokua ke kahua. O au iho no kaholi kakalia kiahi, no au ma kalawahine, no kapuhulu mai au, I kia la, au makikula nui o Kaminaka. So alo mai kako, my name is Kaholi Kakalia Kiahi. I grew up, born and raised, Kapahulu side Kamuki. I used to live Kalawahine Hawaiian Homestead, but I now live in Moanalua. I'm on the island of Oahu in Hawaii, and I teach at Chaminade University. My role is as a culture engagement specialist, and I am in charge of incorporating Hawaiian culture and language throughout the science department, and eventually radiating out to the campus as a whole. Yeah, I think that's all about me. That's important. I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Baker so we can talk about our paper.
Okay, thanks so much for the introductions. Let me see if I can get the screen sharing to work, and so I can show you the slides. Should work. I'm just not very good at doing this yet, so hold on. Okay. There we go. Okay, that working? Yes. All right, so like we said in the introduction, we're talking sort of based on the paper that we published about our efforts to develop family engagement at Chaminade University for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students. Part of the reason we published the paper the way we did is because we thought it was important to sort of document that process of thinking, because we started out from a pretty naive perspective of like, well, what we'll do is we'll look and see what's out there that's best practices in mainstream universities. And then from that, we'll adapt it to Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders and be good to go. And you know, that is not how it happened. And I think there's a lot of times a lack of discussion of that process where you discover that you have a bunch of biases and things you did not understand as part of the process to developing these things. You talk about the endpoint. So we wanted to talk about the process, and then we want to talk about the things that we are developing with an eye towards understanding that we really are still working towards this, and it's a long-term thing, and we don't have like solutions for everything, of course, yet. So what was the purpose, or still is the purpose, of family engagement at Chaminade? We started out with this idea of translating and communicating science to family and community, trying to mediate cross-cultural challenges and misunderstandings, to increase the relevance of STEM to families, and to mitigate barriers to participation that come from misperceptions, other challenges that are cross-cultural and community family based. Ultimately, trying to increase a sense of belonging for STEM Indigenous students and their families. And the context for why we wanted to do this is that there's literature that suggests increased family engagement is beneficial to students, especially for Indigenous students. However, there's not a really clear model out there for how to do that, and there's a lot of variation across different populations, different communities, different demographics, socioeconomic differences. So it's complicated, and we needed to try to understand what might work for us at Chaminade. As we got into this, we started to question perhaps that maybe family engagement itself, the way it's defined, sort of framed in a Eurocentric way, might actually be perpetuating colonial cultural values and exacerbating the cultural disconnects. That, like, perhaps if we were to just take an off-the-shelf family engagement program as described in kind of the best practices in literature about it, we might just be setting up another context for Indigenous students to fail as a way to measure that, oh, they're not engaging enough according to our cultural values and standards, and we're not understanding the larger perspective of what's going on. So we were aware of those things, but didn't really know kind of how to move forward. And so we started by looking at what was in the literature. And what's really interesting about that is there are all kinds of articles saying, here's what's a successful family engagement program. Most of this is not particularly helpful for our objectives. It's not that it's bad, it's just not enough to address the issues we want to address. So the most effective components, according to this research, are things like parent-family orientations, parent-family weekends, email newsletters, fundraising events, move-in receptions. And the focus seems to be mostly on fundraising and on what we call friend-raising. Friend-raising in the sense of like building rapport with families who will be future alumni, who will then also be targets for fundraising. And they might also refer other like siblings, younger siblings, or friends' children as possible students in the future. So it's sort of building that kind of network to bring in more students, to make parents and families feel good about their investment in their child's education, and kind of reassure them that this was a good decision to spend all this money. And so we were not particularly, we didn't find a lot of useful things in this. We were not very impressed with what this could offer for what we were trying to address. And we already do a lot of these things to try to help parents adjust when their kids are going to college. It's not the type of engagement that we were trying to look at. So then we thought, okay, let's talk to the students about what a family engagement program might actually look like. And so we had focus groups with Chaminade Native Hawaiian students. And what we got back was a really interesting set of viewpoints that I don't think we'd really understood before this. On the one hand, students want family support and involvement. They're engaged in higher education. They want to do it. They want their families to support them. On the other hand, they perceive involvement as intrusive and distracting in various ways. So part of this is that a lot of our students are first-generation college students. So their family members do not have a lot of familiarity with all the things that go into higher education, including the demands on time, the expenses, little details like how to fill out the FAFSA and the information that's required. There's a lot of pushback with that because parents would ask, well, why do they need to know about my finances? You know, why do you need to register for selective service? I don't agree with these things. So those things were pushed back sort of immediately about the process. And what we got from this was that students found this really complicated. They wanted to know, well, what do you mean by engagement? Like, you say engagement, well, I'm not sure I want them engaged in the way that you're talking about. So we just recognized that this was going to be a challenging endeavor, that it was not going to be just modifying an existing plan and then tweaking it a little bit and going forward, that we would actually have to start to cultivate relationships in an authentic way that wouldn't look like something that was at a mainstream university, probably. As we dug into this further, we realized that there are assumptions in this family engagement model. Privilege is one of the main ones. Access, time, and money. It assumes that people have free time to be able to participate in engagement activities, that they have time away from work, that they have access to the campus. If students are coming from a different island or from the mainland US, that they could get here for any of the activities we have on campus. And while the pandemic has revealed that we could do some of these things remotely, this is still sort of an assumption that they're going to be able to take time away from other commitments or have the money to be able to do that, to participate in sort of the kind of traditional family engagement plans that are at a lot of universities. And back to the idea of a lot of our students being first generation, families not necessarily knowing how to play the game, not understanding the sort of the rules of how to do what's expected, fill out the FAFSA on time and all those kinds of things, and sort of the assumptions built into that. Not that they're not knowledgeable of that, it's just that we're not looking at how that's affecting communities that have a different perspective and worldview. So our concern still is that family engagement might further reinforce a sense of otherness if we do it incorrectly. So we dialed back from trying to just develop a plan that looked like what would be at other institutions, to think about how we could do something authentic for our students. And we started really small. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to Kaholi'i in a moment to talk about developing what a kihe ceremony, a ceremony to honor the graduates, But the idea is that this is a way to get the family engaged in an authentic way. And it's very small still, and we're building it from the ground up. And then Jolene will talk about how we're thinking about extending this idea of family relationships within our cohorts of students, into the alumni, and then into the communities that they go into. So I will turn this over to Kaholi'i. Hopefully this works. Okay, can you access the slides, Kaholi'i? Yes, perfect.
Can you guys hear me?
Oops.
It works. Okay, technology, right on. Okay, perfect. So aloha me kako. I'm Kaholi'i, like I introduced before. So for this portion of our family engagement, I didn't really know I was doing it till I was doing it. So my entire job is to incorporate Hawaiian culture and language, right? And one of the things I noticed at Shaman University, or especially at UH2, is some things are taught in a non-Hawaiian sense. Like we have lots of kihei ceremonies throughout all these programs, but the way I grew up, which was very steeped in Hawaiian culture, Hawaiian language, ceremony, hula, dance, song, chanting, it always seemed like it was missing something. It never really seemed authentic. So when we're discussing some sort of family engagement or activity for our Hawaiian students to participate in, and something that seemed authentic, I came to, the suggestion, oh, we should make a graduation ceremony. And because I made the suggestion, I was also put in charge of running that suggestion. So that's how we ended up with this. So my thought process with this was, growing up in Hawaii, it was always important to go to college, to get your education, to get to higher education so you can get a better job. But it was mainly for the purpose of getting that piece of paper. It was never really for, attaining that knowledge. It was more for that recognition so that you could, go to all these places, get a higher paying job, because within our community, or at least in my family anyway, we knew most of this stuff already. As kupuna, as Hawaiians, it's just that the communication between Hawaii and the world was a little bit different. So being as that was, I wanted to create something that the community would recognize of their students, or of their haumana, of their children, as their graduation. Because if our community, our ohana, our family doesn't really recognize that you've achieved these things, then what purpose is it, to have a degree? So to make it full circle, and to also thank the ohana, the friends, the hoa, and the families that helped our students get there, it was a community effort. So to create this, it was a year-long process, and each ohana was invited to come and print their own kihei. And every print, or every stamp, and every symbol had its own particular meaning to it. And the idea was to create a story based off of the four major symbols that we used here. So starting from the bottom, we have Kane and Kanaloa, Namaka Kane and Kaniho Kanaloa. And that represents them coming out of high school and realizing that life is very hard. So they go to college, and trying to find their way isn't always easy. It's almost like washing up on shore of a new island and having to find fresh water to survive. So finding their niche, finding their degree, or finding their particular theme that they're interested in was their first journey. Then it was going up the mauna, or the niho we have here, and actually establishing themselves on this island. Once you found your water, you found your sources of food, or whatever it may be, how are you going to survive? Because eventually you're going to have to leave the island. So how are you going to prepare for that? And that journey up the mountain, or up the mauna, to the kuahiwi, to the wawakuas, was that journey to become a senior. And then eventually, as time passed, you'd always have the stars, or the sun, which you represent at the very top, to guide you. And those guidances was never always the same constellation, and it wasn't always the sun. You know, we have many mentors in our lives. We have many friends and family that help guide us along the way. And that's what the la or the sun is supposed to symbolize. And each ohana, although given the same 4 stamps, had different stories to tell and different prints along their kihei. And that's exactly what we're looking for, because not everyone is the same. Yeah. So going through this process, we also got to reconnect with the ohana, talk stories a little bit, connect, and really realize again that yes, our keiki need to go off and go places, but it's important for us to remember where we came from, which is also why, oh yeah, can I switch screens? No? There we go. Which is also why I incorporated lots of our dyes. So all the dyes we see here are all natural dyes, and they're found within the kaimuki or the dryland area. And each one has a particular meaning and symbol, which we can go over later because I know we're also strapped for time. But if you guys want to talk more about that, we can talk about that too. But basically, it symbolized the rough journey, both getting to graduation and beyond. It also symbolized some of their ohana, or the mana that they've acquired with olana, or with the hibiscus flowers, some with pohinahina or Vitex rotundifoliais. We also use some ilima, some sadaphalax, and all of those things. And through that process, they also, as an ohana, learn different cultural practices, some things that they may or may not have learned. And it was more of a bonding process for the students too. So eventually, this is the symbols we use, or the ohekapala. But eventually, all the students, which I didn't tell the ohana yet, they would have to honor their ohana with oli at the very end. And I didn't want this to just be some ceremony, which basically mimics graduation. I wanted this to be a Hawaiian thing, or something unique to Hawaii. So because I've been trained in, or still in training for AWA, I decided that for this graduating class, I found it appropriate to hold an AWA ceremony. And for those of you who don't know AWA, AWA is a plant that's found throughout the Pacific, and it has the same but varying uses depending on your island. Overall, it is a drink made from the Piper methysticum plant, and you pound the root, add water, strain it out, and you make a drink from that. In lots of islands, AWA was used as a drink and in ceremony to conduct meetings of higher court. So usually when chiefs get together to discuss laws, regulations, or possible war or peace, they'll do it over AWA. If for some reason the seasons changed and we need to communicate with the gods, you do AWA. If you're visiting a high chief and you want to honor him in the highest way possible, you give AWA. AWA in Hawaiian culture is said to come from the gods and is the highest form of gift you can give to anyone. So knowing that, I wanted to create an AWA ceremony for all these guys for their accomplishments, but also for the students to share their mana with their ohana, with their peers, and with their kupuna. Because one thing that I learned going to the AWA ceremony is that introductions and velina, or conversation, is very important because they hold weight and they hold mana. So they were in charge of chanting their mo'oku ohau, or chanting their genealogy going back as far as 6 generations on either side. And we did that to honor all of the ohana that they bring with them, not just the physical parents, yeah, or aunties and uncles, or significant others, but those who came before them and those who are to come after them. Because they will not be here without the kokua of their ohana, yeah? And I wanted to honor that. So this ceremony was more for their recognition and less about speeches from the outside. So those in attendance was there to attend and to witness their graduation, that they're coming into almost like adulthood, but their shift into a different phase of their life, and them accepting that and making a commitment to either keep pursuing to the best of their abilities, or to further their education, to come back to our lahui, to our people, and hopefully further educate the upcoming generation and lift all of us up, not just the Hawaiians, but everybody who lives in Hawaii, to higher standards, so that we may be better. And that's what this awa ceremony was to represent. At the very end, maybe there's another picture. Oh, sorry, it's loading. So at the very end, the ohana that made the kihei would come up to the graduates and wrap their kihei around them, tying it on their left shoulder. And this is to symbolize that the ohana has recognized their growth and their changing of phase, and that they're now ready. Yeah. So the ohana has basically passed on their mana to their keiki, to their sons or daughters, or their children. And using that mana, they'll be able to go and do whatever they need, and whatever it is they need to do. And whatever decision they make will be based on their knowledge. So not only their mana goes with them, but their trust, their lineage, and their future, yeah, is all built into this kihei for them to do whatever it is they need to do. And I think, hey, more pictures, nice. Yeah, so this is just the ohana coming in, tying their kihei, and this is my boys. I just taught them how to serve awa, maybe like 3 weeks beforehand, and they didn't know how hard it was to sit in place for 6 hours. So it's a learning experience for everybody. But basically, this took us about a year to train and complete with the current seniors. But it is a 4-year process. So they go through the first 4 years learning about their culture beyond what the public education system teaches us, whether it's perspective, whether it's ceremony, whether it's proper etiquette and protocol. We go through all of that before eventually get into their senior year to learn more of the deeper stuff, so that they have an understanding when they do go off to other colleges or their other lands, and they can represent Hawaii, how Hawaii should be represented. Yeah, and carry themselves proudly. So given that, I think, I don't know, I have lost connection of the PowerPoint, so I don't know if I can change slides. But I think that's it for my part. Now we're going to change over to Dr. Cogwell, so she can explain in depth kind of what else we do with the students besides just cultural appropriation and hula, oli, and kihei.
Aloha, everybody. I think it's important to point out that the group of students that we are doing this with are a group of students who are part of our Ho'olu Scholars Program, which is a program within the Natural Science and Mathematics, School of Natural Science and Mathematics. We have about 120 Native Hawaiian students in the program at the moment. We bring in 20 to 30 each year. It is a full ride 4-year scholarship. They get full tuition. In addition to a lot of cultural and academic support, it is a scholarship program focused on helping these students be successful while staying grounded and rooted in their culture and not losing it. And so when we say we do this with our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students, at the moment, our target population is these group of scholars because it's within our school, and we've only dealing with 30. So of course there are other students on the campus, and hopefully we'll eventually get to branch out to the other departments. But for the moment, this is just within our own School of Natural Science and Mathematics. Another thing I think it's important to point out of what Kohoa is doing with the parents is that for the Kihei ceremony, he makes a point of having multiple options for the parents to be able to engage. So as JD pointed out in the beginning, right, they don't always have the time, maybe they don't have access to come to campus. And so we make a point of having multiple dates where if parents choose to come on campus and engage and talk story and learn about the dyes, then they can. And if they are unable to do that, he's also put together videos and will Zoom. We have some parents on other islands. They get all of this stuff shipped to them with detailed instructions. And again, if they want to Zoom in or have access to Kohoa or, you know, those kinds of things, then we make that available to them. So we try to do it as much as possible in a way that they can engage any way they can, rather than doing it on our time. In addition to the Kihei ceremony, I wanted to point out that we start this journey that they have at Chaminade with a family engagement opportunity, which is our big welcome dinner. So our incoming scholars, like I said, we usually have 20 to 30. We want them to recognize that this is not just money, that this is an experience, that this is a journey, and that they are entering the Chaminade Ohana, the Ho'ulu Ohana, as an extension of their own, so that the family engagement is getting to hopefully bring their family in, but extending out to now bring in new family, which would be us. And the welcome dinner happens at the beginning of the year. The current scholars are present to do protocol and welcome the new scholars in, and we let the new scholars invite 2 or 3 family members to come and have dinner. We have a luau. That one is a little more formal. So where the Kihei is really just about family, the welcome is about family and this institution that they're coming into. So we have administrators and presidents and everybody come so that the family is aware of how special we feel their students are, what an accomplishment not only coming to Chaminade is, but being part of the Ho'ulu Scholars Program is. And we make a point of presenting each scholar and where they come from and what high school and where they are planning on going. And that is in their freshman year. So at this time, our family engagement is really focusing on kind of bracketing their journey, that the family is there to witness their entrance into their journey, and that their family is then there to celebrate their successful completion of that journey. And so that's kind of where we are as far as bringing in their family to this experience. And of course, we are still continuing to explore what's next, what's the next option for engaging the family. As I mentioned, part of what we want is for these scholars. This is an image of our scholars at one of our cohorts at a weekend retreat. We want them to then start to recognize that they are part of this new and expanding Ohana, that they are going to make relationships with each other that will transcend their time at Chaminade University. And so we make a point, myself, Kohoa, and another one of our colleagues who is here, Dr. Nially, we are the academic navigator and cultural enrichment specialist for this program. And in addition to all the things the scholarship program would normally do, academics and support and tutoring and all those kinds of things, we make a point of having activities to try to bring them together in a social way, so that not only will they engage with each other and hopefully start to see each other as a support network, but that they can engage with myself and Kohoa and Christy as well, and see us not just as their instructors. We allow them to call us pretty much whatever is comfortable. Culturally in Hawaii, a lot of times we are called auntie or uncle. I have some of these students who sometimes call me mama, and that's fine. We don't adhere to the strict, I am Dr. Cogwell and you are my student. We want them to see us as an extension of their family. And so when we do these cultural events, when we go and have retreats, every cohort has their own retreat every year, whether it's a day retreat or a weekend retreat, depending on the year. They have different experiences, and the 3 of us are in attendance for all of those. If it's a weekend retreat, We are there. We are sleeping in the same dorms with them. We are engaging in all the activities that we do with them, so that at the end of this, when they leave us, they are not leaving their instructors. They are leaving and branching out their family, we are still there to support them, hopefully. So we make sure to engage with them and make ourselves available to their family as well. Although they have told us that they don't want their family engaged in all the everyday nitty gritty, which we can understand. We've all been in college. We remember that time. We are available to their family. So there are often times where I will have students, or Christy will have students, or I think even Kahoa, that will say, hey, would you mind if my parent called you? They have some questions. Or a parent will call and not tell their scholar. And of course, we have to be very careful because of all of the, student teacher privacy things, but whatever we can do, if they have parents who call us because they're worried their student is been ill and they are not feeling well and they're concerned they're not getting enough sleep or whatever, we are available. So although we try not to allow, with the wishes of our scholars, their parents to be too intrusive, we do make ourselves available so that if the family wants to reach out, they can. When these scholars are first brought into the program, we make personal calls to every single one of them to welcome them into the program. In addition to their official award letter and all that kind of stuff, we make personal phone calls to each and every one of them. And we extend not only to them, but to their families. If you have any questions further, they all have my personal cell phone number, right? And I've given them all permission to give that cell phone number to their families. So it's those little things that we try to do to let them know that their families are important. And now that we have our first 2 major graduating classes, we are starting to brainstorm how to extend this beyond the 4 years they've had at Chaminade. We are in discussions starting this summer about what will for our students, what does an alumni network look like? How do we continue to engage them, to continue to keep them as family with each other, with ourselves, and with our incoming scholars as well, so that we can really build a network that extends for them into their lifelong support. And in that, we will be having discussions because are we going to do a newsletter? Or are we going to do social media? We don't know yet, but I think that we will also be trying to extend those types of announcements if we do newsletters, not only to our alumni, but to our alumni's family as well. And so that might be another way to engage the families of our scholars. So that's all I have for you. I'm trying to be cognizant of the time so that if anyone has questions, feel free.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we can go ahead and get started with the live Q&A portion of this webinar. If anyone in our viewing audience has a question for our group, please feel free to use the chat feature to drop your question. And yes, we actually will be sending this webinar will be recorded and will be available to everyone who signed up for this webinar today. And we also will include the contact information of our panelists as well. So to answer your question, Sharon, yes, we will be sharing not just the PowerPoint, but the full webinar for your viewing. All right, yeah, so the Q&A session is open. Do we have any questions for our group? And I'm just curious if any of our panelists have anything that they wanted to follow up on real quickly from their presentation.
I have too many things I want to follow up on. I don't want to talk for the rest of the time. I think both Kaha and Jillian are they're downplaying a little bit the degree of involvement. And I think you can describe like, oh, and then they can contact us and they have our phone numbers, but it's much more involved than I've seen at other universities. And it's very personal. We know a lot about our students' lives, like more than maybe we want to necessarily, but it's part of the territory of being able to address the things that are personal issues, not just how are you doing in biology lab or something like that. And so building those relationships means getting involved and having access they have access to us, and we want it that way. But it means that there's a lot of time commitment to it, and a lot of things that would not look like normal academic work, I guess.
As I had mentioned during our briefing before our webinar started, this article was very, had a lot of, resonated with me. Really interested in some of the literature review, and I had shared with the group that in some of the work that I've looked at and that I've done in regards to just those students being connected to families parallels a lot of what we see with Native American students in general. Of course, those attending mainstream universities, the larger research institutions. So I just, it was really cool as I went through the article to see some of the sources that were cited, Dr. Heavy Runner and the family educational model. Again, just those same parallels. So that was really great. So I was really excited to read and to see all of that. All right. We got a couple of questions coming in. So does someone want to take, there was one asking about talking a little bit more about the, I don't want to mispronounce that, culture, traditional natural sciences connections.
Cogg, you want to try that? Also, Ula, nice to hear from you. We used to be office mates for a brief time up at KCC. Way back when.
Sure. So okay, so it's been definitely a work in progress. But what I found that works is changing their perspectives of our instructors. So originally, like most schools, especially like our public school system, with the Kupuna program, whenever it comes to Hawaiian culture or Hawaiian teaching, it's always like a side dish, to complete the meal, as opposed to it being the main focus, so what we try to do here is change the perspectives of our instructors, so that they understand more intimately the Hawaiian culture, history, and perspectives of our people, so that when they do teach in their respective classes, they bring those perspectives with them. And it helps a little bit because a lot of our Pacific cousins kind of think in the same way too. So for instance, when we teach one of our introductions to lab etiquette, instead of focusing specifically on, YouTube pipette, you need to know how to use your microscope, we go through the Hawaiian thought process, understanding its values, its perspectives, and not just on a scientific level, but on a broader level too. Like, why are you doing this specifically? What's the wider picture? How is this going to help you in the long run, kind of deal? And it's not really just limited to Hawaiian thought processes. You can see this in lots of indigenous cultures too, and that kind of way of thinking. But it definitely helps when all of your instructors or when your faculty and staff of the department is all on board too. So that was nice. But like I said, it's still a work in progress, and we are trying to create themes here and there that each department can kind of latch onto, that's the easiest, or refer back to when teaching specific courses. One of the hardest ones we're trying to incorporate, which you wouldn't think of, but it's nursing. Trying to have them come on board, especially like the la'au teaching or the perspectives of healing. So still working on it, but we'll definitely keep you guys updated if need be. Okay, hopefully that answered your question.
All right, we have another question from Carmen. States, I'm working with a group of faculty at my institution on a grant proposal focused on racial equity and STEM. We had brainstormed finding ways to include families of students from regional tribal communities. Do you have any advice for us on how to approach that? And then they finished with, I thought your program would have included more family programming. Did you not do that for the reasons outlined at the beginning?
So I'll get to the advice thing in a minute. I have to think about that. It's challenging, but I think, yeah, we didn't include a lot of family programming because we weren't sure what family programming would be beneficial to the families, and we're worried about putting more demands on them in ways that were serving the institution, but maybe wouldn't be serving them or their communities or their children, the students. So we're being really conservative about that. On the other hand, we've made things pretty informal so that there's a lot of open communication. So we don't know what the best programming would be, and we're still trying to develop that. And so I'm happy to hear anybody's ideas for that. But we wanted to build it from the ground up, thinking about what might be beneficial to them, rather than thinking about, well, what does Chaminade need from them, and we were very concerned that it could easily morph into that if we weren't careful. And we didn't want it to be another situation where you could evaluate them on how well they're engaging with us, and that reflecting on students or something like that. So we were very cautious on that for that reason. In terms of like my advice, I would say a lot of communication with families and communities to figure out what would be useful programming for them. Some of that will be just like orientation things for first generation students, helping navigate the FAFSA or things like that. And some of it will be much more probably informal and just relationship building. And it won't look good programmatically, as like, it won't look like you're being really productive. But all of the goodwill and the effort you put into building those relationships is really important. So that's my advice for that.
Is that me or is that you? I wanted to add to that is that we have to remember that when we were doing this, we're doing it for the scholarship program that we have. And so we wanted to also maintain the focus. The scholarship program is for the students, and how are we going to maintain them and help them persist and be successful? And of course, family engagement is part of that. But once we talked to the students and they said, well, we don't know what we want our families to be engaged in, that's, as JD said, we took a step back and said, okay, we need to think about this, because of course this is about helping the students succeed and engaging their family in a way that is meaningful for the family, but is also meaningful for the student, so that we don't hinder their success. And so, as he said, we're kind of taking slow steps to kind of figure that out. And I think that also from the advice perspective, we always want to jump in, right? Because we want to be successful, we want to do stuff, and dealing with Native populations and cultures is hard because you can't just jump in. It is really time intensive. And so as you have those conversations about what that looks like, I think you need to put your patience pants on and just get ready to let this be a process. It might be a few years so you can really tease it out and figure out what that looks like. And of course, our funders and our administrators don't like to hear that, but you just need to toe the line on it, because in the long run, it makes a difference. We're 5 years in now, and I know our administrators are seeing the benefits that we have. So.
All right, next question from Erickson. Thank you for the wonderful presentations. I wonder how you handle boundaries. I have heard so many times that as mentors, we need to put boundaries, but many times our mentees really need help beyond superficial questions.
I've heard that as well. I'm going to say this because I think of the three of us. Well, Kohoa does a lot of student engagement, but I've been doing it a little bit longer in the program than he has, and I have dealt with this. And I would say, me personally, I'm going to be kind of crass, screw boundaries. Our Native cultures are about family. They're about embracing each other. They're about being there on all levels. And I'm sorry, I have peers and colleagues as mentors and advisors who are like, this is my home. I'm a Native Hawaiian woman in cell molecular biology with a doctorate. That doesn't work for me. If I'm going to be part of this program and I'm going to help these students get to where they need to be, then I'm going to engage them in a way that works for me and works for them. And for me, that means embracing them. They're my family. They're my children. I still talk to several of them who have left us and are graduated. It's tough because they do, like JD said, we know a lot about these guys because of the way we've set up this program. They come to us with all kinds of things that we are not always equipped to handle. But what we do then is we then lead them to the places on campus, the dean of students, the health, mental health offices, wherever we need to go. But we're that person that is that touchstone for them to get there. And so it is a struggle. I personally, and I think I speak for Kahoa and Christy as well, because I think that they also extend themselves beyond what a typical professor boundary would be. We go a little bit beyond that. We do embrace them as our family, and we just, I have peers who look at me and be like, oh, that's dangerous. And I've just decided, this is what works for me, and this is how I'm going to do it. And this is what works for my students. I love when my students call me mom or call me auntie, right? I've made that connection. They trust me on a level beyond just being their instructor. And I feel like that allows me to better help them persist as Native Hawaiian young, career professionals trying to find their way in a Western world. And so me personally, I don't worry about the boundaries. I mean, I obviously pay attention and make sure that if it's beyond my abilities, that I go to my dean or I go to the provost, and I do make sure that I am towing the line, right? But I go beyond where I think a lot of faculty would feel comfortable going, me personally. Kahoa, I don't know.
I mean, same. So it takes a village to raise a child, and we're part of that village, whether we want to be or not. And the way I was raised and grew up in Hawaii, everyone's auntie and uncle, and it's almost a sign of respect to greet your elders, talk to them, that kind of deal. And I think as long as we're all mentors, we're all kumus, we're all parents in some sort of way or fashion. And no matter what, they're always going to look up to us. So having that professionalism as opposed to, community is way different, which is also why a lot of times Hawaiian thinking or Hawaiian teaching doesn't quite mix with the Western thought processes of a college. I think this is why most of us, Kanaka or Oiwi, I can't think of the English word, indigenous people, have a hard time translating into a Western school, is because they often don't mix, or the style of teaching don't match. So that's kind of, I totally agree with Dr. Cogg. Not screw it, but yeah, screw it. Yeah. I mean, this is our people, right? We treat them how we grew up, and obviously every student's not the same. Yeah, but yeah, that's how we approach it. I mean, we as locals, as Hawaiians, we have our own way of doing it, and then we work from there.
Dr. Baker, did you have any comment to add? Okay, all right.
Nothing to add. I know there's other questions, so I agree with all that, everything that they were saying.
Someone had asked about the article, link to the article, and Dr. Baker had shared his email address in the chat, and you can contact him to receive a copy, to get a link to the article.
Yeah, I would say, oh, sure, I'll just send it to everyone, and then I realized, like, oh, not like that. So yeah, just email me privately, and I'll make sure that you can access it.
All right. Well, I think don't see any more questions in the chat, so I think we will go ahead and end here. And let me get back to sharing my screen here, and I just have a few closing things to share with everyone. Scroll on down. And we will wrap up. And our wonderful panelists today, thank you again. Thank you again. All right. So again, if you have any questions, would like to continue discussion on this webinar, we invite you to connect in our online community. You can follow the link on the screen. Actually, yeah, sacrants.org/memberships. and get started with the SACNAS membership, and that will get you into the community. We will also want to hear from you. Immediately after this webinar, you will be redirected to a brief survey, and I encourage you to provide your feedback on today's program and also provide suggestions for future webinars. And finally, if you enjoyed today's webinar, you can find upcoming and previous webinars on our website at sacnas.org/webinars. We have a really good collection, library collection, ranging from various topics, all kinds of topics, Native Initiative series, also our chapters series, and student programs as well. So I really encourage you to take a look. And as we've mentioned and noted before, this webinar is being recorded, and we will get this out to those that have signed up for today's webinar, and those unable to attend the live viewing. They will receive this webinar as well, and the contact information for each of our panelists. So again, this concludes our visit with our panel, and we thank you for taking time for joining us today, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.